Welcome to Atheist Talk, produced by Minnesota Atheists. I am Cynthia Egli, president of Minnesota Atheists. Minnesota Atheists practices positive atheism in order to build a community for atheists, to educate the public about atheism, and to promote separation of state and church. We offer free literature and speakers about atheism to the public, and we can send you a free sample newsletter if you're interested. Our contact information will appear during and at the end of the program. We hope that you like what you see and that you'll consider becoming a member of Minnesota Atheists if you're interested in us or interested in you. Our guest for this program is Erin Mattson, past president of Minnesota Now. Erin, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here.
Sure. Well, I'm the immediate past president of Minnesota Now, and I held that position for 3 years. I'm now on the National Now Board of Directors, and I also serve on the National Now Young Feminist Task Force. I am here today to talk about the HPV vaccine. I know that Minnesota Atheists and Minnesota Now often share issues in common, that we're working toward progressive goals together. Thank you.
So, tell us about Minnesota Now and what your organization is up to. What do you do?
Sure. We've been pretty active recently. We've been working on campaigning for peace. I actually was in Washington last weekend and was able to attend the peace rally on the National Mall. There were 500,000 people, they estimated.
Wow.
Another issue we've been focusing on is contraceptive access, pharmacist refusal clauses, both within state laws as well as pharmacy chain rules. And finally, we're just getting going on a new campaign promoting the HPV vaccine.
Great. So that's what you've been working on recently. And HPV is an item of specific interest to us as atheists, because the HPV vaccine can prevent a serious illness, cancer, later in life for people, for women. And yet the religious right, as we often see, is resisting it because of their principles, their ideas. And so this is an area of great concern to us. It's like the access to contraception, where people's religious beliefs are being allowed to interfere with their obligations in their professional role, such as a pharmacist. So we're very interested in this subject. I'm really glad you could be here with us tonight.
Thank you.
What can you tell me about that HPV vaccine?
Well, first off, I'd like to start out with, in researching this campaign initially, I was shocked to find out how prevalent HPV, or the human papillomavirus, is in women. In fact, by the time most women reach the age range of 18 to 22, they've already contracted it. Most cases are silent and will clear up on their own, so most women, and not show symptoms, so most women have no idea. This new vaccine was just developed this fall and was recommended by the CDC in January, and it's estimated that we could wipe out 90% of HPV cases as well as 70% of cervical cancer cases, starting with my own little sister's generation.
Wow. That's really an outstanding opportunity there. A lot of people suffer a lot from things like cervical cancer, and when you have something that you can't even tell that you have, so you don't know that you need to do anything about it, it's very, very difficult. I mean, historically, women have suffered a lot of things like this because they never knew. They've lost their ability to conceive.
Yes, that is one of the side effects of HPV. Beyond most cervical cancer infections are a result of untreated HPV cases that don't show any symptoms. And it's believed that we could not only eradicate cervical cancer, but a number of cases of infertility brought on by HPV.
Wow. So how would this vaccine impact public health overall?
Well, beyond reducing the incidence of HPV in women, it would also reduce the incidence in men. Because most individuals do contract this infection by the time they're adults, clearly we're all swimming in the same pool. So if we are to treat women, then we'll treat men as well.
I think I heard that, wouldn't there be a vaccine for men? You would wonder, don't they have one? Because men do get infected by this. It does affect them, not the same way. But.
It certainly does, and it's not that the vaccine makers aren't looking into it. There are currently male vaccines in trial, but there has been nothing approved yet by the FDA.
But if women were protected, then men would be less likely to get it themselves.
To get it and then transmit it as well.
So what's the recommended timing on this vaccine?
The recommended timing is for girls between the ages of 9 and women up to the age of 26. And the CDC is recommending that girls get vaccinated between the ages of 11 and 12.
Okay. And why is the religious right targeting this vaccination?
Well, the religious right, groups like the Family Research Council have been speaking up and saying that a few things about this vaccine. One, they're concerned that administering this vaccine is going to encourage girls to have premarital sex, as if getting a shot is going to make a girl who's in elementary school more predisposed to having sex, period. Another concern that they have is that it will contradict the abstinence-only education programs that they've successfully put in place in a number of schools. Of course, now as opposed to abstinence-only education, to clarify. So it's really unfounded fears, we believe.
Well, as I think about that, I know if you're thinking that you want people to be afraid of something so they won't have sex, we can think about that. Okay, if you tell girls, if you have sex and you haven't had this vaccination, we're not going to let you have it, you might get cervical cancer, so you don't want to have sex. Well, that's about like telling kids who smoke that they're going to get lung cancer. It has not been a very effective approach.
Well, certainly, and HPV is an STD that's rarely talked about because most people develop it at some point in their lives. What happens is that and because it doesn't show symptoms, it's not a very strong deterrent in the first place. And the notion that a woman or a girl is told that she's not going to develop cervical cancers when she's 65 is going to stop her from having premarital sex in high school is a laughable notion.
It's kind of strange. Well, to take this a little bit further, as I understand it, one of these religious right leaders has said that he might even oppose an HIV vaccine for the same basic reason, that the HIV should scare people out of having sex. This seems to be unconscionable. I mean, it's just incredible.
Completely agreed. I recall seeing on 60 Minutes a religious right leader, I believe affiliated with the Silver Ring Thing group, who said on camera that he would discourage his 15-year-old daughter from using condoms because he didn't want to spread the message that condoms offered any protection. His own daughter, he would prefer that she had unprotected sex.
The irony of that is that even if she remained a virgin until marriage, which, you know, some people do, there's no guarantee that her husband did. And if he gives it to her, if she's not vaccinated, she's going to suffer just as much. I mean, it's like the problem with HIV and the population of hemophiliacs. It wasn't their fault.
Absolutely.
But because it was prevalent in the population, they suffered. And so they're not taking into consideration the secondary damage that happens to this. Even if you follow all of their rules, you're at risk.
Exactly. And we're concerned that what's happening, the undercurrent of this, we believe, is that the religious right and other extreme conservatives believe that by keeping sex within marriage only, they want to make sure, and without access to contraceptives, often for married women as well, it's really about keeping sex completely tied to reproduction for women to make sure that women don't really exceed traditional roles.
It does seem to be a major aspect of it, which is one of the reasons why all the atheist women I know are feminists, because most of the rules that seem to want to keep us from expressing ourselves, from being the best people we can be, doing all the kinds of things we can do, they all seem to be religious rules. All the rules that say that we're somehow less than men seem to have come from Bibles and things of that nature. So we tend to see things that way. We also see sex as a perfectly natural, normal thing, something one should be responsible for, just like driving a car. But that doesn't mean that it's evil, that it's going to do bad things to people just because they have it. And so that's also a totally religious concept. So,
well, and we want people to be able to make informed choices. One thing that we were just aghast at the last National Now Board of Directors meeting, we learned of an initiative through the federal government now promoting abstinence-only education for adults up to the age of 29. That's the new age range.
I've often commented about this thing of trying to prevent people from having sex, that as we evolved, and of course they don't believe in evolution, so they don't understand this, but as we evolved, women became adults at around 13, let's say, or 16, maybe younger. But when we became adults, we paired off, whatever, we began to have partners, and we began to have sex, and we began to have children. As we became more agriculturally oriented and civilization began to grow, girls were still married off very shortly after they hit puberty, and they might have needed to maintain their virginity for a year or two, or maybe at most. And that's not too much to ask of somebody. But to ask of somebody who matures at 13, or now many children at 11, to wait until they get married at 29 to never even check it out during the time in our lives when it is the most powerful force, just doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of inhuman. From my perspective.
And our concern, both in terms of issues of responsible sex education that's comprehensive, as well as this new emerging HPV vaccine, is that we want to make sure that people can spread their own personal beliefs and morality and their own systems about what sex should be for people through their own private families. But we want to make sure that through the public sector, through our public schools, through the vaccinations that are available to everyone, that people are able to protect themselves from public health issues.
Well, that's like saying sex is like driving a car. You need to learn how to drive a car. You need to be told all the things. You need to be taught how to deal with accidents. Not because when we don't stop from teaching people about accidents in order to keep them from having one, we teach them about accidents and how to deal with them, prevent them, and how to handle it when you get into one, so that you can protect yourself, because they're going to happen. So it's part of being able to be responsible is to really know about what you're getting into, and that's why sex education is so important. So what is the religious right saying about the new vaccine?
Well, they're saying that it's going to encourage young girls to go out and have sex. They're saying that it contradicts abstinence-only education. And they're saying also that they want parents to be able to make the choice of whether or not their daughters should be vaccinated between the ages of 11 and 12. They don't want it to be on the required list of vaccines like polio or measles, mumps, or rubella.
I guess for some people, thinking when their daughter is 11 or 12 that she's going to have some sex someday may be kind of uncomfortable. But why is that harmful for them to want to make the families make that decision?
Well, our concern is that this is a new vaccine. It was just recommended by the CDC a few weeks ago in early January of 2007. And most health insurance companies decide whether they're going to cover a vaccine, cover the cost of a vaccine, based on the number of states that require that vaccine for school matriculation. And in this case, this is the most expensive vaccine ever developed. Part of that, we imagine, is because it's new, but also it's actually a 3-step shot over 6 months. And so it's $360, and we believe that cost would be prohibitively expensive for the vast majority of people, unless if it's covered by insurance.
So in other words, they're walling it off. They're making it unavailable to the majority of people by not having it be required for school.
In effect, yes. They're blocking it off. It's a stealthy move. And our concern is that, as with many of these crazy conservative things, that what they'll do is co-opt language from the center and say, we support this vaccine and we're excited that it's available, but we want to make sure that it's not mandated. And with that, they're making it prohibitively expensive for
It
most people.
sounds so reasonable to say, well, the family should make the decision about this until you understand the consequences of that approach. And in fact, when you're dealing with something that's an epidemic, you can't just say families should decide, because what one person decides has an effect on everybody else. If a group of people don't want to get vaccinated, they become a pool for potential infection in the future. And we've seen this happening with measles and polio and things like that, where you have outbreaks because people are not vaccinated. And it is not really something we have that maybe we have the right to make our own decision on entirely. We should really be thinking more about public health and the benefits, the effects on everybody around us. So they're kind of cloaking it in a...
Exactly. It's pernicious. And beyond the level of sexually transmitted infections, cervical cancer is actually the second leading cause of cancer in women worldwide. So we're talking about an epidemic of gargantuan proportions. In fact, it's been singled out, this new vaccine has been singled out by the Gates Foundation already, even though it just became available. And they've donated almost $30 million to spread these shots around the world.
Wow. That's amazing. So what does NOW want to try to have happen?
What NOW wants to make sure is that this vaccine is required by the states. And so we will work through grassroots lobbying, which is our specialty, to help that happen.
Okay. Do you have specific things that you're doing?
We're getting started on our campaign right now, and we plan to work both in the Capitol, where the laws are made, as well as having conversations with our school board members. We believe that change starts from the very grassroots, and so we want to talk to our school boards. We believe that we'll get a great deal of support. A recent study showed that, by Indiana University, showed that 80% of parents support this vaccine.
Well, that's excellent. That's really good to hear. Well, tell us a little bit more about what you're up to. I mean, what other kinds of things have you done recently?
Well, just last weekend, I was in Washington for the National Now Young Feminist Task Force meeting, which was wonderful. We were a task force formed 4 years ago by a bylaws change. And our job is to advise the National Now Board, on which I now sit as well, which is a brand new thing, on issues of, on making sure that our current work is incorporating the views of young women, as well as making sure that young women's issues are in the main issue docket. So we talked about a number of things over the weekend. One of them was the war, because we did participate in that march. We also spoke at great length about comprehensive sex education and also media and body image issues. The task force is primarily young women in high school and college.
Oh, really? So NOW is reaching women in that age group?
Yes. In fact, the youngest woman on the task force is 15, and she was 14 last year and on the task force.
Wow.
How quickly I've become an old hand in that group.
Well, I'd heard sometime in the fairly recent past, the time travels very rapidly for someone in my age group, but that NOW had kind of lost touch with younger women, and younger women had lost touch with how important abortion rights are, for example, and things like that, and that a need was there to reach out and communicate with the younger generation. And so it sounds like that's been happening.
Certainly. Last summer we held a Young Feminist Summit. That was the last Young Feminist Task Force charge, and it was up in Albany, New York. We had roughly 700 people attend, I want to say, 700 young women. And there were workshops about how to become an activist. People were sharing strategies together.
That sounds great. We've got a few more minutes. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, or any kind of summary comments you'd like to make about the vaccination or sex education or anything?
Well, I would like to urge anyone who's watching this program to write a letter to their legislator and call as well. Calls tend to get the widest response, and ask them to please either sponsor legislation or support legislation if it comes up to make this HPV vaccine part of the state rules.
That's very good. Yeah. There's a lot we can do if we communicate. Anything else?
Would you like me to say some more?
We have a few more minutes if we'd like.
I certainly can.
You were going to talk earlier a little bit about the comprehensive sex education issue, too.
Absolutely, I can do that. We spoke about that at length last weekend with the Young Feminist Task Force. We're very concerned with efforts by the radical right to enforce abstinence-only education as the only sex education in public schools. Mm-hmm. We believe that young women need, as well as young men, need accurate, medically accurate information about sex and protecting themselves from both infections as well as unplanned pregnancy.
What's the situation with that here in Minnesota?
You know, here in the public schools, we're doing fairly well up here. Some of my sisters on the Young Feminist Task Force in the South were sharing horror stories about what was happening in their schools.
Uh-huh. Well, I've heard that quite a bit of money has been directed into these abstinence-only programs, and that they even teach things that flat aren't true. For example, that condoms don't really protect against HIV. Well, that's not true. I mean, they may not protect absolutely in all cases, but they have a very, very beneficial effect, relatively speaking, to using nothing. Things of that nature. Well, I think I really appreciate you having come here to be on our show with me, and I think it's time to start wrapping this up. So what I'd like to say is thank you for joining us for Atheist Talk. And if you would like more information about Minnesota Atheists, including a free sample newsletter, you can please contact us, and our website will be appearing on the screen. It probably has before. This is our newsletter, and we will send you a copy free, and you can find out about us. We have a wonderful website, so there's a lot that you can see there to find out about what we're up to. And we hope that you'll consider becoming a member of Minnesota Atheists. If you're interested in us, we're interested in you.